talking about procurement. So, preaching to the room, obviously, you all are here, you're all obsessed with accessibility, digital accessibility, and assistive technology, and all that fabulous stuff. And so, what we're going to talk about today is essentially looking at how we can make that better. Specifically, in Jisc, we want to make our own processes better, and we would really like your input. And that it is you that we're kind of doing this for in terms of our licensing structure and the procurement of us looking at products and getting products in for you, the customers, to then buy via Jisc or us to give you the information for you to make those decisions. So how can we make that process better? So that's kind of where we're coming from. So I'm going to look at your pizza toppings in a second, and there. So that's the welcome part. So the aim of the session is really just to get your views and your input, and we're going to look at our procurement question sets and our offer documents question sets. So that's confusing. So there are better people than me, though, that can explain that. So I have the wonderful Hannah Lawrence and Alison Urquhart here from our licensing teams. And this is really them generating this piece of work and carrying this work forward to improve the systems and questions and processes that we already have. So it's a big project, and this is just the Kickstarter of finding out some opinions from our wonderful members and customers, which is you guys. So that's what we'll be doing. So we'll kind of explain the overall, explain the procurement questions, explain the offer document questions. Then we'll go into, I've lost how many people are here, so we'll probably go into some breakout rooms. It's super informal. It's not about solving the procurement problems of the world all in this session. We are just wanting to chat about it and let you guys chat with each other and voice your opinions, and then we'll round it up and we'll tell you what for the next kind of what we're going to do next. Okay, so that's kind of where we are for today. So where things get tricky. So in terms of procurement, when we're looking at it from Jessica, and I said in terms of our licensing team, there's lots of people who interact with this information on a product, whether that's a piece of software or a piece of hardware or a platform that's going to be used by a university or college. In terms of that buying process, there are lots and lots of people that are involved, and we're not going to question whether they're the right people or not. But there's lots of people involved, and not everybody in that process knows enough or sometimes anything about accessibility. So if you think about it from an institution's point of view, you maybe have a lecturer or somebody in student services who has found a product and they want to be able to use that with their students or with their colleagues. And so they then go to manager to ask if they can have that product or buy a license or use the product. And then that has to go through certain checks via the manager to the procurement team, and then the procurement team asks you to tender, and then that goes out and they find out the information from the companies, and that's not always the person that made or designed the product. That's often a salesperson who has to answer the procurement questions, and you can see how it all gets really kind of complicated and dare I say it, a little bit messy. Well, that's even more complicated if you're then going out to another company like Jisc and saying, hey, we're looking for some products that do X, Y, and Z. So what have you got? And so we have to then be the person that's in between the customer and the vendor saying, right, what's the information about your products? What do you want to know about your products? Putting all that information in a digestible format, so that you can make informed decisions about the products that you're buying for your institution. So there's lots of people involved. And when we're trying to change these processes and speak to people, what we want to do is, yes, we're asking accessibility questions in that process, but how can we make that easier for the vendor to give us that information, easier for us to know what questions we should be asking so that the answers that we get are useful and meaningful for the people who are buying the product to then pass it on to the people who want to use the product. And so that's kind of where we're coming from with improving the process. So we're not saying that it's not being done or that people don't know enough, but there might be people within that are new. So how can we make it a clean and tidy and digestible process? Hopefully you're all thinking that makes sense. That's a good thing to do, yeah. So I was saying I've put on this slide moving from vague to valuable. I don't know how good that sounds, really. But these questions are, we have question sets, which we'll talk about in a second. So we were asking you essentially, are they fit for purpose? Do they still work for us? Should we be asking more detailed questions, or should we be asking questions that when we get a really detailed answer, we can simplify that into the document that then goes back to all the customers that want to buy it. Because we're trying to make this process easier, dare I say, slightly quicker and slicker for people to take the sting out of buying products. And so obviously the people at the end, the students and the staff members, when they get to use the product, they're not going, oh, it doesn't do this. That's kind of a deal breaker. It makes it, that's not always uh, those aren't always the questions that get asked. So some of this will be a bit of a wish list. I mean, if we came up with like 85 questions today, we can't guarantee all 85 questions will go in any of the documents because we've got to start this process off with some sort of like easing people into that situation of asking about that information, getting that information, reading about that information, digesting that information, and then using that to weight the product that you're buying with all the other competing things like cybersecurity and GDPR and all the other things that have to be considered within the procurement process. So obviously those documents have lots and lots of questions. We're just focusing on the accessibility ones today. Okay, so when we ask these questions, what we're trying to establish, I guess, is if when we ask it, it's easy for the vendor to give us an answer. Yes or no answers sometimes work, like, is your product compliant? Yes. Well, but what is it compliant with? A scenario that we've had in the past, I don't mean necessarily in Jisc, but I've spoken to institutions where they've said the vendor is saying this product is compliant, but we're not sure. How do we check? Well, that's exactly how do you check? Do you have to go and get a formal audit of another product, things like that? And there are universities that are doing this very well when they're buying new products, but sometimes it can be quite difficult to interpret the answers of those or check on those. And sometimes, as I say, if the salesperson at the other end hasn't really grasped what we're asking, then is the information that they put in there any use to us? Is it valuable to us? So these are all the things that we're asking us to think about today when we're asking these questions. What question will elicit a really good answer, and how do we then display that answer to you guys so that the people reading it can do something with it? So I'm going to pass on to Hannah just now, who'll talk a little bit about the procurement documents and the procurement question set. So thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Nice to meet anyone that I've not met yet. I can see some familiar faces, so that's nice. So yeah, I'm Hannah. I'm licensing manager in the teaching, learning and assessment stream of licensing. I focus on assessment and feedback software at the minute, but accessibility has a special place in my heart, and I negotiate many accessibility. I'm negotiating many accessibility tools as we speak. So hopefully I'll be improving the product offering there very soon. But in terms of improving that product offering, not just in terms of accessibility products, but in terms of all the products that we have available, this is the current question set that we are asking in Chest In a minute, I'll hand over to Alison, who will introduce a question set and asked by the the licensing managers, so people managing publishers, content resources. But these are the questions currently asked to software vendors. And I know many of you will already see a red flag straight away with that top one. As we know, it's not the most up-to-date version. But what I'm really interested to hear when, in the breakout rooms, um, when we have them, if we are having breakout rooms, I think, or groups, whenever we discuss these, is what does that mean for you? If a vendor hasn't got 2.2, what does that mean? And what effect does that have on you on the ground day to day? Is it a total no-go if vendors don't have 2.2 at this minute, or is it okay for it to be on the roadmap? Um, the next question we are asking is, do you have an accessibility statement, a voluntary products accessibility, a VPAT, a compliance report, and we ask for copies of those and links to them so we can share them on the Chess website so people can make informed decisions around those. Do you have a process to respond to reported accessibility problems? And if they do, what is that process? Um, we're not currently sharing that on the website. It's something that we do see, but we would like to do in the future. It'd be interesting to know how you would like that shared with you, and what problems it may incur if they didn't have a process to respond. And do you see that a lot? Is that what you're seeing a lot? That vendors, especially in the software space, don't have processes to respond adequately? And if so, what are the problems that they're not responding to? Um, you do your captions and trans. So we ask them if they're online workshops or any of their training sessions that they might have around their software. Do they meet accessibility standards? And if they do those sessions, or do they have captions and transcriptions that meet standards as well? And we ask them that if all their files that they share are accessible too. And that's currently what we are asking software vendors. And in all honesty, where they're not always answered um, comprehensively, we always make sure we're getting an answer on the WCAG criteria, but some of the others are not, I guess, followed up with the importance that I think that they should be. And so your input and comments on that are super important. Yeah, so thank you so much. I'll hand over to Alison now, who'll speak a bit more about the LSM documentation.
Hi. So within LSM, the offer document is an important document that kind of acts as a bridge between the vendor and the customer. The licensing managers use that to be able to gather information about the product so that then it informs what's put on the front page of LSM. And the questions that we ask at the moment, I think, are kind of pulled from the sorts of things that get reported at the top of an accessibility statement as a kind of overview of um, what a product can do, or a platform or documents within that. So again, asking about WCAG and the level of compliance. Then going into some more technical questions about maximum font size and text reflow, um, about whether you can change the background and foreground color contrasts, and if you can, how you would do that. Keyboard equivalents for mouse actions. Can you operate the um, everything with a keyboard only? Um, about the layout and structure of things, for example, heading levels and meaningfully marking up so that things can be accessed by assistive technology. Can text be selected and read in text-to-speech tools? And are text descriptions available for graphics and images? Because I can imagine that's quite a challenge for ebooks and things like that, and complex diagrams. And then obviously we do also ask for a copy of a link to their accessibility statement. So Again, same as Hannah, it's very important that we're asking the right questions. Are these the right sorts of things that we need to be asking? Are they going to elicit, sorry, the right kind of information that you need in order to know whether you should purchase a product? Um, is it in too much detail? Or is it helpful to have this level of detail? And also, what would be the best way for us to present this information to you at the moment? It can vary depending on the way the information is. Placed into LSM because we don't have a particular format by which so sometimes we'll just get a link, say what level of WCAG something is compliant to or not compliant to, and a link to the accessibility statement. That might be all the information that's provided to us by the vendor. Um, how yeah, we'd like to know how it can be presented in a way that makes it easy for you to compare products. And yeah, to allow you to make informed decisions because it's very important that we're vendor neutral, um, but also presenting to you information about things that don't comply, we feel is important, but we don't want to overwhelm you with too much information. So I think that's where we're coming from is what are the best ways to ask this and the best ways to show it to you.
Let's unmute myself there. Fabulous. Okay, well, hopefully that's making sense. Please put in the chat if you're lost, if we need to explain a bit more. So what we're going to do, and by the way, I'm absolutely astounded at the amount of people that love pineapple on their pizza. I thought that was like a big no-no, but y'all are pineapple crazy in the chat. And some of the other things, I'm like, I'm totally going to have to and reevaluate my choices because somebody's having chips on their pizza and I am all here for that. So I'm not dissing pineapple. It's just saying that I just wasn't aware that that was as much of a thing. The internet's been lying to me. So for the breakouts, I will, by the power of Zoom that's been invested in me, I will be making some breakouts and we will head into the breakout rooms. I will post the question sets into the chats, hopefully, so that people can share that so you can have a little look at those while you're in there. But this is really just a discussion because we'd like your opinion on, oh, now I'm getting the unstable internet. I think I'm just unstable. Um, about how you think this would be. So in terms of the slide here says rethinking the questions. So we'd like your ideas or edits to those questions or just better ways to ask in terms of getting really good answers and then rewriting the script as in how can we ask those questions to make answers clearer and then the offer document more useful and how can we as Alison was saying present that information in an easy to digest fashion. Okay, so that's kind of what we're there for. Anyone have any questions about that? Stick your hand up, give me a wave, stick it in the chat. I feel like we're okay. Okay. Um, Rob's kickstart in the chat already with would it be too much to ask for a traffic light signals to indicate compliance? Oh, well, you can have a wee chat about that in the breakout rooms there. So I will fire you all into breakout rooms. Hello. 3, 2, 1, you're back in the room. There we go. As people come back. Lovely to see you all. There we are. So hopefully, as you all drop back in, that's been of use that doesn't even make any sense. Of use to you. And I'll move my slides on so that you get to see the next slide. So I've put on this slide it's how today feeds into our ongoing improvement. So would anybody like to comment? And we won't go around each room and ask what people are thinking, but would like anyone who wants to comment. So I see Rob, you've got your hand up.
Hey
Feel
there.
free to take the mic. Hello.
Yeah, I put the comment as we went into the breakout rooms about the idea of traffic lights, and the group discussed that, and there was a general feeling that something like that would be helpful, but not the three lights, but possibly five or 10. So essentially giving
Ooh.
some sort of score or rating at the top level, plus a top level summary. Um,
Right.
Except, of how accessible that particular thing is. We were sort of envisaging that, the more advanced procurement teams could sort of say, well, actually, we're going to set a minimum of whatever, assuming that that was adopted, would set a minimum of, say, five, and anything below a five in terms of accessibility won't be considered in
Right.
this
Okay.
round. So we thought that that might be quite helpful. But the other thing that came up is the fact that some vendors seem to obscure the detail that we actually need. So they're
Okay.
deliberately trying to throw us off the scent on how inaccessible their product is. So they either get over technical on a VPAT, and sometimes it needs a technical specialist to unpick it to work out, is that actually a problem or not?
Okay.
Because they've thrown just because they've thrown a lot of detail in, you're like, is that actually an issue? So sometimes you need to unpick it, and having somebody who understands that, and at least having all the different vendors. If you're looking at a particular category of product, for example, having them all lined up side by side would be quite useful, possibly to the initial, at least for the initial scoping of the procurement documentation. I know Matt said that he's doing it, and I've been involved in situations before, and you are subject to hundreds of pages of documentation when you're going through a big tender and trying to, I think that phrase, trying to see the wood for the trees, trying to work out what's important is really difficult, and you haven't got a lot of time to do it. So things that help you do that in a very systematic and sensible way, I think would be really helpful.
Great. Thank you. Beck, you have your hand up.
Yeah. Maybe this is good to follow on from what Rob says, because or sorry, was that Matthew? I think we should ask about whether they've got an accessibility contact at the organization. It's inevitable that you find out that there is some kind of issue with the product that you're using, especially if there's going to be new features released. But I think we do probably need to know the name of the person, or who we can ask about, the technical levels of detail in the VPAT. I think finding out if they have a VPAT and then passing the VPAT on to someone who does understand it is a good idea. But in general, I think we should be expecting accessibility statements. I work with students so I think like in general, like an okay level of accessibility, most people can get through it. But for people with more moderate to severe disabilities, we do need it to meet those standards. That's what they're for. So I work with those students quite often, and people get totally left behind. So I think we should just be asking for the technical information and give it to someone who can have a good look at it. Doesn't mean you wouldn't go with that tool. It just means that we've got our eyes open about what needs to be fixed and who we would speak to about that, and where it would be on the roadmap. The other thing I was going to say is that I read this interesting paper when I was looking at some of our ebook suppliers. I'll just put it in the chat, where they
Yeah.
use spot checks. So they just picked out 5 useful spot checks that checked whether people had correctly reported things on the VPAT, and it turned out that they hadn't done that. I think things would be different now. This paper's quite old, but doing something like a couple of your own spot checks, getting somebody to do that is a good idea. I know it's probably really hard in procurement though, 'cause you've got so many things to look on.
Okay. Just people can put in the chat just their thoughts on, do you think your institution has someone who would be able to dig into it, like if they got the VPAT and dig into that? I'm wondering if people would go, we don't have anybody here that can. So how could we help that? That's just off the top of my head based on what you're saying. I like what you were saying though, yeah. Jessica, you have your hand up.
Hello. Yeah, this has just come from a bit of a library perspective here, but I'd like to see a couple of questions around, firstly, if vendors can provide alternative formats for content that isn't accessible. And that's something that libraries spend a lot of time on, things like remediation, if they're purchasing something that is not fully accessible. So things like scanned like archived newspapers that aren't OCR'd, that kind of thing. And then it'd be nice to see a little bit of a robust question around assistive technology, and maybe where it's less of a kind of a wicked checkbox thing, but maybe I know some vendors are sort of using assistive technology users to test their products, and more things like user journeys, which shows that somebody can actually sort of go in and do a search and retrieve an article rather than sort of individual pages meeting kind of like a sort of wicked checkbox criteria. So sort of going beyond compliance to usability.
I love it. Yeah, okay, usability. Anyone else want to verbally comment? You can be putting things in the chat as well. Please feel free to do that. We do take the chat afterwards, and we do read it. We do. So we will be looking at this. Crowdsource accessibility checks and share experiences. Oh, I feel like a subgroup coming on. Great stuff. Okay, so I'm going to pose a question to you. So get your tippy tapping fingers ready to answer it into the chat. If you'd rather stick your hand up and answer it verbally, you can do. There's loads and loads of questions that we're talking about. And I said earlier, you know, we could come up with 85 different questions and we wouldn't be able to put them all in at first. And, you know, so we're trying to think about what would we prioritize. And you've talked just in the 5 minutes since we come back about traffic light systems, vendors obscuring details, so rating and contact details, spot checks, lots of stuff. So that's just in 5 minutes. So I'm going to say to you now for the chat, put your one question. If you were allowed to have one question, just one, and it's just from you, what would you go for? What would be your question that you would be like, if I'm only allowed to put one question into this document, what would I want in there? So there are other questions in there, but if you're thinking, I would want this one asked. So put that into the chat. That would be really good. Okay. So while you're doing that, I will entertain you with the fact that a couple of minutes before the rooms closed, Sally and I were talking about the pizza topping scenario. And the computer turned around to Sally and said, I believe that you've swapped to a different language. So Zoom thinks that chatting about pizzas and toppings is a whole other language. And I'm here for that. Okay. So all your questions that you put in the chat and the conversations that you've had, the notes that we've made, and that we pull together from today, what's going to happen with that is that the lovely Alison and Hannah will be pulling all that together, and then they'll take that on to feed into our internal conversations about the procurement process and the documents themselves, and what can be done, and the kind of like life cycle of that, and feeding it in. So this is, as we said at the beginning, this is the start of a journey in terms of making these changes. Excuse me. So it's likely that we will be coming back to you later in the year and saying, right, we would now like to speak to some of your procurement people to get their thoughts on what our procurement people have been putting together. So it'll be an opportunity for you to say to your procurement staff and the people that are doing those things at your end, can you get involved in this conversation or at least feed into this now? So we've asked you guys who predominantly work with the products themselves. So the next stage might well be more from the procurement departments themselves. So hopefully that makes sense. So that will be later in the year. That will be coming. So watch this space. We will be coming back to it. So in terms of if there is anything else that you would like to add or that you didn't want to say here, please feel free to email me, or I'm going to nominate Hannah. We'll stick our emails into the chat just now, or you can message us on Teams via the community, but our doors are still open in terms of getting more comments on that. So don't feel that just because the session is over that you can't input your question or ask for something if you think about it later today or something like that, please email us. And I will stop sharing, so hopefully I can see your beautiful faces as you leave and continue on with your Wednesday. I'm not sure that we're having a July clinic. I think what we're doing, I said clinic and it's not a clinic anymore,
Oh.
Laura.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
we not at the beginning. Not certainly not on the first Wednesday. That
Well,
won't be
there's
happening
something
then.
happening though. There's something happening, which and
Yes.
we've got Beck here as well. I think
Yes.
we're having a real in-person thing in Glasgow on Wednesday, the 2nd of July, and you heard it here first. So, and Beck and Drew from University of Glasgow are hosting, and we're going to be talking about things like procurement and European Accessibility Act and ebooks and accessible maths. And it's an opportunity for people to just reflect and refresh after a long term and just, have a bit nice professional networking and things. We are just rustling up the webpage and registration for that. So if you're in the community or follow me on LinkedIn or whatever, I'll be sharing that as soon as it's live. So so there you go. An in-person thing. But otherwise, yeah, there's not an online one because I'll be in Glasgow and Laura will be on holiday.
Yes.
So
So there will be stuff happening and we will be reaching out to you. So you will be able to interact with the community. That doesn't all close down or anything like that. And we might do a little collation of all the stuff that we've done across this academic year to just round it up for you. But yeah, keep in touch. And if you have any holidays coming up, then enjoy them. We've got rainy, rainy weather here. And we all know what we're having for tonight's tea, don't we? Or dinner, depending on
or
where
a
you are in the
pizza.
country. Pizza! Try a new topping.
I should have done. We used to have a filter on Zoom where you could have a little pizza party hat. We should have preempted that and
Oh,
put
we
that
should have
on.
done that. So see, I was too spontaneous for my own good.
Oh dear.
Thank you so much, everybody. And we will see you really soon. Okay. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.